The Stranded J Podcast.
Welcome back to the Stranded J Podcast. I am your host, Stranded J. All right, folks, we're going to be doing another special commentary episode of the podcast where we are going to watch Superman 2, part of our Summer of Superman leading up to James Gunn's Superman coming out in July. And while I record this, July is tomorrow, and we are very behind on these movies. We may not be able to watch all of them together before the movie releases, but we certainly will watch them all together, and I will do my best. It's just been a busy few months, and it takes a while to watch movies and talk about them. So hopefully you guys hang in there for this. So how we're going to do this is we are going to grab your copy of Superman 2, whether it's the Blu-ray, the DVD, the Max version, or your 4K. I have the 4K, and just make sure it's not the Richard Donner cut. I love the Richard Donner cut. I actually prefer the Richard Donner cut, but for the sake of this marathon, we're going to start by just doing Superman 2, and we may do the Donner cut down the line. If you guys are interested in that, let me know in the comments what you think of that, and we can do a commentary on that one as well, maybe as a bonus commentary. So just make sure you have your regular theatrical cut of Superman 2 and get it started, and pause it right at absolute 0. So once you hit play in the menu, or when you hit play on Max, just make sure that the scrubber says 0. And then I'm going to count down, and we will watch it together and hit it at the same time. So hopefully, ideally, we'll be watching the same time frame with each other. May get off a little bit. I remember doing this with Kevin Smith's podcast. I wasn't involved. I just wanted to say that. But he did all the Batman movies, and we did it this way, and it was fun to listen to him give his opinions on the movie. So it was fun, but sometimes it did feel like something was off. So I apologize if that's the case. Just hang in there with us. You don't actually have to even watch the movie if you don't want to. You can just listen to my commentary, but it's definitely more fun to watch it at the same time so you can see what's going on the screen. So get your copy ready, and we are going to get started here. Just get ready for my countdown, okay? So if you need to pause it, go ahead. And if you're all ready, here we go. In 3, 2, 1, go. And the 1970s Warner Brothers logo is up. That's where you'll know where I'm at. So yes, this is just the theatrical cut. This is what was released in theaters, and we'll definitely talk about that, and we'll talk about the kind of what led to this movie. Not just Superman 1, but kind of the behind the scenes. Hopefully you'll get some interesting tidbits, and we can kind of just enjoy it. This opens up with a nice space intro where you have kind of the sand art. They used to make it look like you're going through space, and the explosions of Krypton and things like that. And you see, I remember seeing a behind the scenes featurette from when I was in high school, maybe, of that and how they made it. And it was very interesting, and I've never been able to find it since. But it was very interesting on how they did that. We're getting the Kryptonian theme, or the Krypton theme for the movie from Superman 1. And we are going to be reintroduced to Jor-El. I don't even think they showed Jor-El, though, for many reasons. But we have Zod, Ursa, and Non, and their banishment to the Phantom Zone. Now, this always looked really bad in front of this. It looked like a matte painting or like a screen. And the reason that this all looks kind of different, and you have this weird soldier, and this looks really flat compared to the original Superman. It's due to many reasons. First of which is Jeffrey Unsworth, the cinematographer of the original Superman movie, passed away in between shooting Superman 1 and 2. Also, it was shot simultaneously, and I would say about 40 to 50% of Superman 2 was shot before Superman 1 came out. But notoriously and very well chronicled, the movie was going way over budget due to the new effects they were doing for the flying stuff, and Richard Donner was having issues with the producers, Elia and Alexander Salkind, and they had to pause Superman 2 just to get Superman 1 out. And in between Superman 1 coming out and Superman 2 resuming filming, they fired Richard Donner, and they brought in Richard Lester. And so you're seeing a lot of these issues because we have, two directors kind of working together. And for Richard Lester to be able to get a credit for directing, you have to shoot your own amount of a movie. And so he kind of went in and reshot stuff. Other logistics were involved, such as Marlon Brando refused to be a part of Superman 2 due to money reasons and many other reasons. And so they couldn't use any of the footage from Superman 1 with him. Most of it was because they got rid of Richard Donner as well, and it also changed his contract up and things. But that's where that all comes in. Another thing that was kind of different about this is you may think that the music is similar, and it's the exact same kind of music, obviously, but the orchestral tracks are a little different. The reason that's the case is because John Williams, who composed the Superman theme and the whole score, he said due to commitments, he didn't have time to come back for Superman 2, but essentially it's also rumored that he also was not happy with Dick Donner being removed and didn't want to be a part of it. So this is still his compositions, because they obviously own that, but they had to kind of re-record them. And so sometimes when you feel like that feels a little flatter too, it's probably because it's not John Williams leading it. Everything about this movie it's a great sequel. It's a great sequel to the first movie. However, everything about this movie has some jank to it that the first one didn't. Jeffrey Unsworth was a big part of what made the Superman movies look so good. And when they lost him, it really threw the kind of the vibe of these movies out of whack, I would say. But now we're just going through our recap of Superman 1, getting some of the highlights of what happened so everyone can be caught up. And yeah. I would say when I was a kid, this was one of the ones I watched more often. I didn't watch Superman 1 as much just because there was less action. It was his origin. He didn't appear until later in the movie. This one, and actually, believe it or not, Superman 4 were the two I watched the most, because they both had a lot of Superman in them, and they both had a lot of action in them. Even though the action doesn't hold up as much as it did back in the day, as a little kid, it was still Superman fighting and flying and doing all kinds of stuff as Superman. So I watched this one all the time when I was a kid. And they do kind of a similar intro as they did in the first movie. However, yet again, feeling a little cheaper, I would say a little bit cheaper. The other thing that we will be addressing throughout this movie, I will probably bring up some of the changes. I'll try not to do it too much just because that's not always fun. Especially if we do the Richard Donner cut, we can do that. But I will bring up a lot of the, what was originally intended when they were doing this as one movie. So one other thing that people forget is Superman 1 and 2, if you watch them together, they were technically supposed to be one movie. That was supposed to be Superman 1, and it was supposed to end the way Superman 1 ended, where he goes back in time to kind of reverse everything, kind of the notorious part of that movie. That was supposed to culminate the entirety of the whole, it was one big script. Essentially, instead of Superman, chasing down the rockets at the end of Superman 1 and they hitting the San Andreas Fault and all that, it all happened, but he actually saved everyone originally and threw the missiles out into space, which then in turn released the Phantom Zone that was flying by. And then you get Superman 2 with Zod and the gang. And then that all kind of leads to the next part of the movie that would have led to it ending with the same ending as the first movie. That's why if you watch the Donner cut, you see him reversing time again, because that was the intention. It feels repetitive in that version just because you're watching Superman 1 and Superman 2, the Donner cut, and not Superman, which was what it was supposed to be originally. So yeah, some fun fact about that. The other thing that's very interesting about this movie is you'll see a lot of times Christopher Reeve, his weight will change, and he'll be a little bit scrawnier in some shots, and then he'll be a little bit bigger in other shots. The ones that he is much bigger, obviously looking more muscular than skinny. He was never skinny, like a string being like he said he was before he started before he got cast for Superman. But he was a little bit smaller to start out, and then he gradually got bigger throughout the production. Whenever you see him a little bit bigger, those are the shots with Richard Lester. A lot of times too, you will see him, or you'll see like, you know, a lot of scenes where the cast is kind of looking like they're shot much better, and then other times they're not. That's yet again some reshoots going on. Any kind of comedy you see in this movie, like really like corny, hokey comedy, is usually because Richard Lester came in and kind of did that. It's odd too, because you see a lot of shots that Donner shot and then Lester came in and just kind of remade, which is very, very interesting, because that's yet again how you get your credit to to say you directed the movie. So he kind of just took, you get a lot of the Joss Whedon, Zack Snyder stuff going on too with this, which is very interesting. So yeah. And then another fun fact is a lot of the Daily Planet stuff was shot all continuously. So whether it was Superman 1 or 2, if they're in the Daily Planet, they were probably shooting. This is probably a lot of it was before Superman 1 premiered, and they were still cutting Superman 1. Obviously they reshot a lot of stuff too. I always enjoyed the look of the Daily Planet in the Chris Reeve movies. I always thought the Daily Planet looked like nowadays it looks a little dated because it looks very 1970s and just the way it's set up. But I love that. I love how it's like a grimy, like modern for the time newspaper. I always thought that was cool. You always have the Art Deco kind of otherworldly Daily Planet, which they had in like Superman Returns. And I think they're doing that quite a bit in the new Superman movie, which I love. Like it makes it timeless. It makes it like the comic book, but sometimes it's a lot of fun just to see this, like to see it like this. But a lot of these shots, obviously, yet again, are Richard Lester, and the reason you can know that is because Richard Donner did not do the Eiffel Tower sequence. That was a Richard Lester thing. Yet again, that was a different intro for Donner because they had to have a different reason to release the Kryptonians other than him throwing the missile. So they had to kind of rewrite the intro or the beginning to show, how are we going to get these guys out? So they make this whole big scene at the beginning, which is a pretty good scene. I actually do like this Eiffel Tower stuff. I always love that too, and the score, the kind of the march slowly creeping in as he's becoming Superman, the dun 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 dun. They did that in the trailers for the new Superman movie as well, and I thought that was great. But when you hear the Superman theme in this, like take this scene where he just became Superman and flew away, and then take the same song from the first movie, and it's going to sound less full in the sequel, and that is due to the fact John Williams didn't really oversee it. And the effects get a little choppier too. I know that Superman was obviously dealing with it with their own limitations with the technology, but in this one, you can see just a little bit more of the seams because of the effects. They had to cheapen it because they spent so much on the first one, and that's a running theme throughout the Chris Reeve Superman movies. As you get into 3 and 4, you definitely see the budget cuts. I've never, and I don't remember guys, I have not, I did a commentary on Superman 1 about 5 years ago, and I just reposted that one because it's about similar opinions, but forgive me, there may be some repetitiveness if you've listen to my original commentary on Superman 1 and then you listen to this one. And it's kind of funny because you'll see like a 5-year difference. But my opinions I may be repetitive with some of it because I don't remember everything I said in that commentary. But one thing that I feel like I said, and if I didn't, I'm going to say it now. I've never been a massive fan of Margot Kidder as Lois Lane. And I know that's blasphemous for a lot of people. She's kind of the classic Lois Lane for many that they grew up with her. And I grew up with her. But Margot Kidder was never quite the Lois that I envisioned from the comics. And maybe it's because I also grew up with the animated series. And I always thought that Lois was like kind of the most well-rounded Lois. But this Lois, I just sometimes felt was a little... She brought the spunk that I think is what made her kind of the classic, but she also, I don't know, came off a little dumb. And I know that's more in the writing. I don't really blame Margot Kidder for that, but I still feel like they didn't quite make her as ahead of the game as she should be. And I think that's why now we're seeing a lot of Superman stories where she knows that Clark Kent is Superman, because they've said it before, and that's why they got married in the 90s, is you can't really be a star reporter that just always finds the answers and is almost like a detective and not know who Superman is, especially after such a long time. You can always tell the origin where she doesn't know who he is, but she'll always have to figure it out at the end to make it a little more believable. Because anytime you have this long love triangle between Clark, Lois, and Superman, which happens a lot in this movie, you tend to make Lois come off very dumb, and that's not fair. This is very Lois Lane, though. I don't know what her intention is to go up there. I don't know what she thinks she's gonna get out of, maybe just getting like what they're talking about and kind of figure out what they're doing. But I don't know. It's very Lois Lane to do that and then go, wait a minute, what am I doing and how am I going to get out of this? And that's eventually where you kind of think, is Lois just expecting Superman to come save her? So yeah. And fun fact, one of these guys, one of these terrorists, is Mr. Dursley from the Harry Potter films. Very young version of Mr. Dursley. They'll show him here at the later on, but again. But I think that's another reason though why I do like this intro, but I feel like Lois is written a little bit differently, and that's yet again a little bit of the Richard Lester touch, I would say. And you always, and more credit too, not just to Dick Donner, but to Tom Mankiewicz, who was kind of a uncredited writer for the original Superman movie, but he really wrote it. I mean, this movie, or the first movie, went through so many drafts and the initial concept and all that. And you had Mario Puzo come in, and you had a lot of people come in and touch it up, and they still all get credit for it. But Tom Mankiewicz is just a consultant, and without him, I don't think the movie would have worked. And he's what brought it. He grounded it to the level they needed to make it not just a dated kind of stupid movie. And when you lose that, you start to see it, and so you start to see it a little bit in this one. Obviously, Tom Mankiewicz didn't come back for this one. It was Dick Donner who brought him in. I always thought those C4 charges were mashed potatoes when I was a kid. Not that one, but the one the dude put on the side there that was white. I thought that was mashed potatoes. But like right here, that flying shot, I feel personally that is a budget cut. I don't think that was the best we could do, because we didn't get a lot of shots like that in the first movie. They looked much better. And yeah, I get it. The first movie is very, very expensive, and the Salkinds were not happy about that. As much as they admit, it needed to happen for the movie to work, it still bothers me, because you just had to put the money in to make it work. You just had to. But this is a pretty elaborate sequence for them coming in and kind of, adding it later on. They put a lot of money and time into this. But that's like almost the same shot, him flying there, that little cut. It's like the same. That's where you start seeing that in Superman 4 as well. You rarely saw similar shots of Superman flying in the first movie. And obviously him flying to the Eiffel Tower there a second ago is that was just a dummy flown on a wire rig. And they did that in the first movie as well, but they were much better at hiding it. That one too there I think is another dummy. Him going up the Eiffel Tower. Interesting way they do that though. I don't know the full behind the scenes of that sequence, and did they make like their own version of the Eiffel Tower? But like I said, yet again, this is how they were able to get the you could see the wires there. That was interesting. That's probably a 4K thing. They had to get a reason for the villains to get out of the Phantom Zone. But that was the original reason. It was those missiles that Lex shot. That's a little bit of animation there, which is very cool. Well, that was weird. That looked like almost like Superman was swimming there for a minute, like in a pool. He like did like a breaststroke. Breaststroke. Is it breaststroke or breaststroke? Oh man, people are gonna give me crap for that. I wasn't a swimmer. And you got these shots of the Daily Planet on the outside. These all are definitely Donner. Not necessarily this. I don't think this is, but the pan of the Daily Planet is definitely Donner. I hate to compare so much. I hate to make, all of these comparisons to the Donner stuff and whatnot, but it's really hard after you've not only seen the Donner cut, but you heard of what happened with this whole situation that, when you saw this movie back when it released, I'm sure no one cared and it wasn't a big deal. No one even probably knew. But now that we've had so much history behind it and so many things that have come out, it's hard to not, look at that. Because you always growing up, you always said, man, Superman 2 is really good, but there's some weird moments. And you didn't feel that way as much in the first one. You had a couple, but that was a very George Reeves joke. This freshly squeezed orange juice thing. They brought this into the comics, and they've also brought it into other Superman films and things. Along with the smoking, Lois smoking. They tried to really emphasize that in Superman Returns. And Kate Bosworth, I don't know, man. She just didn't seem like, maybe she is a smoker, but she did not seem like one in that movie. It felt very unnatural to her. But Margot Kidder definitely looks like she smokes. These gags, getting his thumb stuck in it. And this is kind of a precursor. I mean, it is a precursor, but it's kind of has some similarities to the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films and Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man 1 and 2. actually all three of those movies, you could tell they took a lot of inspiration from the first three Superman movies. And one of those is the whole Superman questioning his job as Superman or his responsibility of being Superman. And, he has a person in his life he really cares about, and he doesn't necessarily know if that's what he wants to do in life. And, while Spider-Man's is very like, this is a responsibility I don't need anymore. And it's causing my personal life to have a lot of issues. This one isn't so much that because, Clark, is doing fine as Clark and Superman. It's more of an emotional, like, he's not like, I'm broke because I'm Spider-Man and I'm losing jobs because I'm Spider-Man, or Superman. He's doing all of these things still, and he's doing just fine. He just wants to be with Lois. And that's, as a kid, you're like, gosh, Superman, why would you do that? We also have the great, Gene Hackman back. Ned Beatty is Otis. Never been a huge fan of Gene Hackman's portrayal of Lex Luthor either. Another blasphemous take. But to be fair to Gene Hackman, Lex Luthor was not fleshed out as he is now. We didn't start seeing a very complex version of Lex Luthor until about a decade or two later. You start getting the John Byrne stories where he made him a businessman instead of a scientist criminal. He was a businessman criminal. And, then you start adding in the complexities that Smallville introduced that they took from some of the comic books, such as, he grew up in Smallville. He was friends with Clark. I've never quite been able to marry myself to that idea. I've always thought that made the world a bit smaller. Same with Smallville being close to Metropolis. Like, a lot of people talk about that too. And technically that is the truth. And a lot of this stuff wasn't developed until much later. But I always grew up thinking Smallville was in Kansas and Metropolis, while fantasized, it was the same distance as like Kansas to New York. It wasn't necessarily New York to me, but it was the same distance. It was far away from Kansas, and no one knew what Smallville was, especially in Metropolis when it's this big city. And I know that's not really the case, but that's just always how I saw it. And so then when you added Lex Luthor into the idea of him also being from Smallville or having his dad leave him in Smallville or whatever it may be, I'm like, man, this is a small world. There are a lot of good things that come from that too, though. A lot of motivations from Clark and from Lex, and you see that all in Smallville. But not only do you see that in Smallville, they also added that into Superman's Secret Origin by Jeff Johns when they redid the origin again, and that's the canon origin as of right now. So there is a little bit of connection there, but none of that was established yet in this time, and so Gene Hackman really had to just play a villain, and he didn't have he was a genius, but he didn't have much else. So you can't dog on him too much for that. And this is all Richard Donner stuff. However, it's very odd. In the Donner cut, it's just lit differently. There's a different film. I don't know if it's a different filter on it or what have you, or just different color grading, but it's just darker. It's more blue and dark. And they just came in and lightened it. It's very, very reminiscent of Justice League with Joss Whedon. And, we have another fun fact that kind of ties into the animated series is they wanted to use Zod and Ursa in the animated series back in 1986. And they even drew animation designs of those characters. But due to just the weird logistics of that with Warner Brothers and DC and all that, you have certain rights to use some characters and then certain rights to not. We've seen that with Spider-Man like crazy. But they ended up creating Jax-Ur and Nala in that series, which are essentially Ursa and Zod. That was the idea. This is always a pretty messed up scene. It's very like, I know that like it's supposed to be, but just like to see these like guys get their suits ripped up and like just completely like decompress and die in very scary scenarios. And obviously this stuff isn't very accurate to the real NASA space missions. They look a little sillier, but like this guy is just gonna be stuck on the moon inside the lunar lander, and then you have one guy floating off into space forever. You got another guy who just like got vacuum sealed. That's gonna be chilling on the moon. Like that's also disturbing. And when they go to the moon in Superman 4, I wonder if they see those guys, because they wouldn't decompose. That's a very dark thought, but like it's true. What's a curl? And some of this dialogue is so funny because it's like, it's normal. It's like pretty well written, I would say. I don't think it's horrible, but like it's also very, it almost is like a modern comic book. It's almost like having a Dan Slott or Brian Michael Bendis writing this movie at times when they start getting into the details of like, what's a curl? And the one thing that I always kind of wondered is, you know, with this group, like we didn't know enough about these guys. I mean, we learned a little when they got obviously sentenced to the Phantom Zone. And Zod's obviously a general because he's General Zod, but like you never really know their backstory of intelligence. And that's one thing I'll give credit to Man of Steel and obviously to John Byrne as well, where they kind of had these birthing matrix ideas of on Krypton, everyone is born in an artificial womb that led to them, you know, being assigned to a certain type of person, whether you were bred to be militaristic or scientific or, you know, something artistic, all these things. And that was your destiny. And then Superman is the first natural birth. Like I always thought that was a fun concept, right? Because you know, then you know, once you get older after watching these movies so many times, you start to ask yourself some of those questions. And this projector of them just like, it couldn't have been them, a projector of them sleeping. Like sleeping in their beds, so then they wouldn't question it. It's a projector of them playing chess. I think the idea is a little bit that, you know, during the day, that's what they'd be doing, so they weren't caught, but they're leaving right now, so. Gene Hackman actually decided to have a bald cap much longer in this one than in the first one. Man, it's crazy to watch this movie, though, in such a high definition, like a 4K mastered copy, because you even can see the seams on his bald cap. You can see where they like covered his sideburns and things. It's very interesting. Obviously, bald caps are not foolproof by any means, and it was good for the time, but you know, now you got someone like Nicholas Hoult who just straight up shaved his head. And Michael Rosenbaum. And Michael Rosenbaum always talked about when he was Lex, he had to shave his head constantly. I mean, like every day pretty much. And then they had to put a ton of makeup on it to, make it look even more smooth and like he can't grow hair. And that was another reason I think he left that show early for many reasons, but he always talks about how he disliked that. So for a movie, it's probably much easier. And it looks like we're getting something quite similar to this in the new Superman movie as well. Not Lex breaking out of prison, but this next situation where they go north to find the Fortress of Solitude and find information. There's definitely shots in the trailers of the new Superman movie that Lex is definitely going to go and, infiltrate the fortress. This Niagara Falls scene I always enjoyed as well as a kid. Interesting aesthetic for a Superman movie. And this is all stuff as well that's Richard Lester. But credit where credit's due. I always thought this was a fun little sequence. There are moments I don't like. How Superman has to reveal, spoilers. Superman has to reveal, Clark has to reveal he's Superman to Lois. And much better in the Donner cut. But the Niagara Falls stuff is kind of fun. And it's kind of a core memory for me as a kid watching these movies is that stupid kid falling and the mom that doesn't care. Probably one of the more dated sections of this movie, though. Seeing this love room at Niagara Falls with all the pink and yet again, this is introducing a lot more of the camp and just the corniness that you got to have a very careful balance with Superman. I think it needs it for the character. I just think it's an inherent part of his character to have a little bit of the corny and campiness because that's kind of the idea of his character to a degree. But man, the more you incorporate that and pump that in, the further away from Superman you can get as well. And this just like sleazy dude. And like even like the reason they're out there, honeymoon racket in Niagara Falls. Like I know it's supposed to be stupid, but and Clark is such a like and like they write it in a little that he's just getting closer and closer to just being so into Lois. Like when he's Clark, he just can't help himself, but it's so mushy. And you still get a lot of that, like I said, that George Reeves, like they didn't ever have a lot of romance, obviously, and if any in the George Reeves series, but just that whole, just the reminder to the camera almost, I'm Superman, but I'm playing Clark right now, right, guys? You get a lot more of that in the writing for the sequel. Well, that's kind of weird. Is that like a lava lamp pillar? I didn't see that before. That's wild. I wonder what the budget was to just be able to make this stupid room. This Superman 2, though, it does have one of my favorite set pieces of all Superman, and it has nothing to do with Superman. And it's a Donner shot scene, and Lester kept it in. We'll get to it after Superman loses his powers, but the diner in this movie is somewhere I've always wanted to go. It looks like such a 1970s dive diner I just would love to go to. I think about that diner more than I should, to be honest with you. And here's the mom of the year with her child. You know, you always have them in the movie, the very forgetful mom and not paying attention. But I don't know. As many kids that are stupid out there as they can be, this one kind of takes the cake, to be honest with you. I don't know if any kid would actually like do what this kid's doing. But you never know. We live in a weird world. One thing that James Gunn mentioned in an interview just like this week is that basically Clark, it's not just the way he acts and the way he looks as Clark Kent that keeps people from figuring out he's Superman. Apparently he has hypno glasses, and that's in the comics according to James Gunn, and Tom King mentioned it. And I have not read every single Superman comic to ever exist, but that is probably the one slight negative I have with the new Superman movie, is him mentioning that, because I'll go with it, whatever. It's not like a deal breaker for me, but that concept kind of ruins some of the charm of the idea of Superman, which I know everybody has a problem with. How would they not know he's Superman behind those glasses? It's in the performance of Clark Kent and how so many people can dismiss a guy if he's doing all the things that they don't want to see. And he just figures that out because he's the most human of all of us, even though he's an alien, and he's able to figure out, studying them, these are the things that people will not pay attention to me for. And, the physicality that changes and the outfits that change, and he can literally just change everything about himself that makes him like no one would ever think that. And there's that kind of famous situation when Batman v Superman was coming out that Henry Cavill did, where he went out to Times Square. That doll looked so bad too. A doll going into Niagara Falls. But he went out to Times Square right when they were promoting Batman v Superman. They had billboards everywhere of him as Superman, and he was just walking around and no one knew who he was. And it's that idea of, they've had, you've had very famous violinists go into the New York subway and just start playing and people ignore them. And, usually it costs thousands of dollars to see them. Things like that. It's because that is the concept of Superman. And that is the concept of Clark and Superman, of people pay attention to Superman for various reasons. And he knows what to be Clark, what wouldn't get him noticed. And I always loved that concept, and the way that Frank Quietly would draw him and say All-Star Superman. You see a lot of concept art of how he draws Superman and Clark so differently, and how you can take the same structure of a person and just change the posture and change the way their hair sits and change their facial expressions. And that's enough. Obviously, that's why we have Lois. That's where it comes into the problem we were talking about with Lois not knowing after so long. She would eventually figure it out because she's around him every single day. But that is the charming aspect of that character. And so I don't know. We'll see how it goes in the movie. We'll see how they handle it. Maybe it's something that's just not even mentioned, or maybe it's something that if it is mentioned, they mention it in a way that works really well. But I don't know, man. We don't need to be putting in magic specs to make someone not notice a person like Clark Kent, in my opinion. And here we are with Lex and Miss Tessmacher going in, finding the Fortress of Solitude. What you'll see in this is there is no Marlon Brando, which also kind of expands the lore a little bit in a weird way, where, when you saw the first movie, you're like, oh, his dad recorded a bunch of these things, and they eventually, start and end after so many years of him, learning. Once he becomes Superman, they're kind of done, but he goes back to kind of reassess certain lessons in life and things. And then you start seeing his mom, and then you start seeing some Kryptonian councilmen. And you go, how many volumes of this does Clark have? And like, I know he talks to him too, and he talks to Marlon Brando even too, and like they kind of interact in a recording kind of way. But it did come off originally that the AI or whatever it may be had its limits for Superman, and he couldn't just do everything in the fortress. And then they kind of, because they couldn't get Marlon Brando back, it kind of turned into this weird idea of like, well, there's a lot of people that recorded these, and I don't know, that gets weird after a while too. The other lesson that is gone in this version of Superman 2 is the lesson of Clark choosing to turn his back on his responsibility and the privilege of his powers and things like that. And he doesn't really learn he learns his lesson by, later on, obviously he gets beat up and things, but he just kind of comes back with he left Lois leaves the crystal out, and he just kind of becomes Superman again. Here's one of the councilmen. I don't know why they would have all of these, but what do we know? We didn't get that much information. Maybe it's just more generalized teachings from Krypton. But the lesson is gone because then he just comes back and he's Superman again, and they go back to the fortress, and the fortress is fine and all that. In the Donner cut, we get that lesson. We get the sacrifice because he did what he did. There are repercussions for that. That's always nice to have. That always drove me nuts too, is the weird, like, I know that's supposed to like line up with the crystal stuff, but the whole like weird chiming noises that the recordings have while they're talking, that always kind of tickled my ear in the wrong way when I was a kid. Minor nitpick. And the Phantom Zone in the comic books is always something that has kind of changed over time as well. Some versions, especially back in the day, it was just a Kryptonian prison of empty space and time. Well, sometimes it's just a prison. Other times it's the Phantom Zone is a whole other almost universe or micro universe, that pocket universe, whatever you want to call it, that is established to be its kind of own living and breathing world. So sometimes the Phantom Zone is used in that context, and they've expanded on the Phantom Zone a lot in the comics, especially recently too. I mean, it's been going for a while now, but they just did some Phantom Zone stuff in the Superman comics and Action Comics this year, where Superman goes back in, and he's, there's a new character they introduced a while back named Mon-El, who's, he has his own lore, and there's a lot we could get into a whole podcast about Mon-El, but, essentially the Phantom Zone has become its own place with its own rules and its own kind of laws, and the criminals, it's kind of like Australia in a weird way, where it's like it was originally intended to be somewhere where you put the criminals, and now it's been there for so long that it's kind of developed into its own place. And like it has its own, like I said, its own rules and its own leaderships and things like that. Its own lawmakers and its own law bringers and its own criminals. They all kind of break off. And that's a big question that they ask, is like, is this a way to take care of your criminals, essentially? Is it humane? And this is always kind of an interesting little thing they do, and it was a kind of fun new way to show off some of how to make this work is how can Clark save Lois without becoming Superman and proving her right? Just building up to the whole idea that subconsciously Clark really does want to tell Lois. But this is always kind of fun when I was a kid too, where it's like, how's he going to get her without being Superman? One question I always had, though, in some versions, Clark lowers his glasses to use heat vision. In other versions, he uses... that's very natural acting there. Oh, God. But in this version, he just uses his heat vision right through his glasses. The question is, if he uses his heat vision right through his glasses, are those glasses... in some versions in the comics, the lenses of the glasses are made out of Kryptonian glass. But I doubt that's the case in this version. So, technically, wouldn't that melt his glasses off? I know it's overthinking it, but that's something even when I was a kid, I kind of thought about, because I just remember in like the cartoons and stuff, he would lower his glasses before, or not have his glasses on to use his heat vision. So he didn't melt them. These people just like casually walking down the bridge, not seeing the woman floating in the water. Let's go, dear. This is not our problem. Emphasize the Clark is not Superman. Now you got to save me. But even the music cues are a little sillier and things like that. And here we start getting this very long kind of, not introduction at this point to the Kryptonians, where they're kind of making their rampage go across the country and on small towns and all this. And most of it is gags. Some of it isn't. Just to show how destructive they can be. I always thought Terrence Stamp was good in this part. I thought, he was very intimidating and scary. Did seem like the leader of the group. I also really liked Michael Shannon in the role too, though, and they play him very, very, very differently. This one's a little more of a comic book kind of take, and I think Michael Shannon's was a little bit more of a natural kind of, this is a real kind of character that could exist. But there's always the debate on what's more fun to watch, the iconic chewing the scenery kind of character, or the more like, oh, I see this is like there's a lot to this. You can unpack this character quite a bit. And she just wipes out this snake. PETA would have a field day. I do like this a little too, though. That's a great like little moment where he has to remind, like, yes, we get it. Like, don't get cocky. We all have them. And it's funny too, they even brought in a little bit of like a non-type character in Man of Steel as well. You have Ursa in this one, and Fiora in Man of Steel, and then you have Zod in both. And then those are the main two, but then you have the big guy that fights Superman, and he doesn't talk, and he's a big guy. And that's, I think, kind of a nod to Non. But some people take this scene and they think it's kind of crazy, because it's like, why would he trip? Like, why would he trip and fall into a fire? I think the idea is he subconsciously is just wants to do it, and so he lets himself. And he kind of mentions that in the movie. I think people miss that a little too, but um, he just is so desperate to want to tell her. I think he's just kind of letting himself do that subconsciously. And the transformations that Christopher Reeve does are always classics for these movies. This is very similar in the transformation that he has in the first movie when he's thinking about telling, and the same music cue when he's thinking about telling her right after the terrace scene. From his voice to his posture to these things. But see, like, a lot of people criticize that and say, why would he do that? He's Superman. They talk about it. I mean, yeah, it's a pretty obvious thing. You got forward, Lois. And, when you're a kid, this stuff is, it's better when you're an adult, and you can watch it and kind of, it's charming and romantic and all that stuff. But when you're a kid, you're like, this is mushy. I just want to see Superman fight the villains that are coming. I don't really have much to say about this scene. I do think the chemistry is pretty good here. I always thought that Margot Kidder and Chris Reeve did have very good chemistry, and I can see why she got cast in those ways. And again, though, Superman has impeccable timing to reveal his secret and give up his powers just when people just as powerful as him decide to roll into the planet. And you got these like country bumpkin cops. We're going to talk about food and beans and I don't know where this is supposed to be. I think they say oh man, he's eating fish. We don't eat fish in these parts. Yeah. I don't know what the costume choice was to have these guys wearing like black, like light cloth with like leather accents that are super like pleather accents with like shiny look like dudes out of the Matrix a little bit. And this there he's telling him to go out there and just blow these guys away with a double barrel or threaten them, but that's the other weird thing is they introduce new powers to the characters in this movie that are not like they have like the telepathic abilities. Like that's new. Later on, we see a very infamous moment with Superman in the fortress that power I did not know he had. But I don't know. I guess as a kid, I always kind of just made my own explanation in my head of it being they have different powers than Superman, and their cells react differently to the sun or something, which is a bit of a stretch. But I guess that's just how I told myself that in when I was younger. But yeah, it was always kind of odd, like we're telepathic abilities. It makes you start to wonder, like, do these writers and directors know who Kryptonians are and what they do and all that? Non's just kind of like the Lenny. This looks pretty good. This flying. I always thought this was shot better. I don't know if this is Donner or not. I would guess it is. But it looks just a little smoother, a little better, in just less use of cropping in them flying onto a backdrop and more of them like that is very cropped in. You got a lot of that like projecting from back end projection that they do and things like that. You can just see, and it's just this. There's just moments that are, I don't know, different than others. But about here, you can see like Chris Reeve is a bit bulkier. He's a bit more. He's filling in the suit a little bit more. You can tell this is later on in shooting as he's been continuing to work out. And then you'll see some shots where he's just like completely slimmed down. And you can tell they shot them like while they were shooting a lot of the first stuff for the first movie. And the country bumpkin kid, he's got to have the overalls and just be dirty and have a dirty face. And I do think that the General Zod stuff does work better when you flesh out his side posse as well. They have the same music as they do in the diner in later on, which I always thought was interesting. Very repetitive. This has got to be Richard Lester stuff as well. Just this. What do we do in bumpkin towns? Well, we drink beer and we arm wrestle. We're from some Midwestern town, probably. We're all dirty. We just have dirt on our face. We eat steak. We arm wrestle. We drink beer. That does sound kind of accurate, to be honest. But that's not besides the point. It's really just our police officers or our sheriff's department is very incompetent. Our children walk around just completely dirty, like they've been rolling around in the mud with the pigs, and they wear nothing but overalls. That kid was not shocked at all by a man being thrown through a building into the middle of the road. Of course, the dude's name's Boog. Where is this place? Do they say? I don't remember if they say where they are. And why is that's the other thing I always remember too. Why is this kid British? Please let my daddy down. We were just eating pork chops and arm wrestling and drinking beer. And it's also, the same thing with him falling on that rug and into the fire. A lot of people could ask, why isn't Superman paying attention to what's going on in the world? Why isn't he hearing these things? It's because he's selecting to not right now, and because this is what he wants. Yeah, he looks big here. I mean, he looks like he's like worked out here. So this is up, like I said, later on in the shooting. And it's hard, I gotta say, he didn't do a lot of like the padding in his suit and stuff. I saw one of the suits when I was at Warner Brothers that he wore from the first movie, and it is nothing. I mean, it is just cloth. The moment you take that thing off, it's just wrinkles and it looks small. Um, so that's it. It doesn't. I think that's why like Zack Snyder had Henry Cavill in one of these suits, because you really know if you're Superman if you can fill in the suit and, one, not look goofy, overly goofy, and two, like fill it in, because it takes more than people think. I always kind of liked this too. This like Superman goes all over the place to get these things, and I always loved that concept people talk about where it's like, Superman could fly you to, Japan for food at night and take you home. That's always a cute concept. Idaho. It's always these moments that, kind of date the movies a little bit. Whether it's the TVs or the way that, the reporters dress or the cars. I always find charm in that. Like I said, one of my favorite moments is the diner, and you cannot find a diner like that looks just like that anymore. Later on in the movie. And so, some people, like, man, this makes this movie look so corny and old, and it may not always be timeless, but it adds its charm to it, I think, later on. This is just like another episode of the Incredible Hulk around this time. But you got to remember that too. Like, you can't look at these movies in the same lens as after seeing things from 2025. You got to remember it was on TV at the time. What shows were popular, what movies were popular, and what superhero stuff was going on at the time. And when you have things, Wonder Woman with Linda Carter for how revolutionary it was, it's definitely, I think, a product of its time. Not the messages, but just the pacing of the storytelling and the episodes and the concepts. The way to introduce things. Like I was just talking about with someone recently. Even the George Reeves series. The George Reeves series did not have any. It didn't have any supervillains. It had all like new concepts, and that that's always very odd to me that they were able to make that work. But that was the kind of TV people were watching. Is like, they want to see Superman, but then they want to see Superman fight a lot of regular dudes, like criminals that just wanted to shoot him. And that's kind of that's kind of why they did that. I mean, beyond just, whatever there may be when it comes to less popular characters at the time that weren't developed, and budget constraints and all that. You got to kind of remember that too. Like, the things people wanted in a movie were very different than what people want in a movie now. In some ways standards are much higher. In other ways, I think standards have lowered. So, you got to kind of put yourself in the shoes of what would I want in a life at this time? And I think it makes it a lot easier to watch stuff like this. And this is actually, I always enjoyed this stuff too, because it just shows, like, in the first Superman movie, you didn't see a lot of the power sets of Clark, due to, limitations and the effects and things. And, while this has a lot of limitations too, you start to see a lot of models and stuff. It is also fun to kind of they took some risks to show that, instead of just having Superman to take care of and have all of his abilities and show them on screen. Now we got to show 3 other Kryptonians that do similar things. And they give them a lot of time in this movie to go around and just kind of show how powerful they really are. I didn't know Superman had a table. And Superman never drinks when he flies. He said that in the first movie, and he's drinking. That just looks like a normal, early 80s dining set. I always thought, though, the Fortress, they do a much better job, I think, from the 50s and the way they're doing it in the new movie. And Grant Morrison did an All-Star Superman. You have a better balance for the Fortress, so it's not just a big ice castle with nothing in it. So everything looks weird when it just kind of is randomly appearing like a table or something. In those versions, it's very sci-fi, so it's still the Arctic, and they use a lot of the crystal stuff and things like that. But there's also a lot of mix with retro 50s sci-fi kind of looking stuff, and you can kind of, in that especially in All-Star Superman, he has living quarters and things like that, and that's a little more interesting. I'm talking about that as opposed to this dialogue, because not necessarily saying it's bad, but it's uncomfortably mushy for me. To see Superman so oh yeah, change into something more comfortable. I'm about to get laid. That that's not what I necessarily am looking for in Superman. And it's funny because you can have the romance, you can have Clark and Lois making out, you can have them definitely embracing in love, but avoiding duties to go on a sexy retreat to the Fortress and sleep in this big silvery hammock. It's a little too much for me. Yeah, she's getting in a skimpy gown. I don't know. I never really bought this. I never bought the whole Superman wants to, and that's probably why they haven't been doing it as much in modern, storytelling of Superman. Is I don't think there's ever a part of Superman that ever wants to not be Superman. And I know that that's kind of an argument they make in Henry Cavill's version is, it's a burden to be Superman. And there was just a recent interview with David Corenswet where someone interviewing him kind of mentioned called it a burden. And he said, I wouldn't call it a burden. And I agree, because I just don't think Superman thinks of it that way. I think he has frustrations of wanting to fight to be more human and be more a part of something and not feel like an outcast. Those are all relatable things that he does. But I don't ever think there's a part of him that's I want to get rid of my powers to be more human. I think he goes, I like this balance of, I wish I could be Superman and have what I have and help people and to the best of my ability, because that's all he wants, is to help people. And having these powers is the best way to do it for him. And it's, obviously he wants those for that reason. And I don't think he ever thinks to himself, because of love, I can't be Superman and I want to just be human to have love with Lois. Like they got rid of that idea, I think, a little more, because it's like, that's silly. Why can't he be Superman, have his powers, and still love Lois and love and have a relationship? And now in the comics, they're even going as far as, obviously showing him have a kid with Lois, and now there's he is a dad. And who says you can't go that route? I think it's much more complex, much more interesting, and you got to give Superman Returns some credit for that as well, because they were the first ones to kind of introduce that into the movies, into the more mainstream of like, Superman has a kid, and that was a big reveal in that movie. But I think that finally broke some of the weird. Superman's notorious for getting into these kind of storytelling loops, whether it's the whole Superman, Lois knowing if Superman is Clark or not, off and on, and Superman wanting to be Superman or not want to be Superman, losing his powers, getting his powers back, dying, coming back to life. All of those things, I'm glad that we're moving on from, and it took a long time. Just recently, we're starting to see that kind of, let's move forward and take a few more risks with this character. And I think that's where we have stopped to see he still has a lot of relevancy in this time. And it's not grounding him. It's not getting rid of what makes him great. It's just progressing him just enough that it makes it feel more modern. I also love how when he stops being Superman in the chamber, they don't not only take his powers, but they grow his hair out and drop it, and they put him in a silk shirt and some black slacks and dress shoes, because that's part of the chamber as well. But what I mentioned earlier about the consequences of this movie is, those consequences went away in this movie, and you'll see not much comes of the fact that he, gave up his powers. He gets beat up and humbled and realizes he made a mistake and needs to fight Zod. But outside of that, that's all he goes back and he kind of gets everything back, and they show that whole thing get blown up. And I do not imagine Superman sleeping in that by himself. Or even setting that up for them. But I don't imagine that being the only consequence, and the computer system blows up and you see it blow up, and then everything's just back to normal from what you see in this version. In the Donner version, you are given a little bit more context of like, this is, there's more to this. Because you are going to do this, you have lost contact with us as Kryptonians, because you are now human, and we are using everything we can to make you human by destroying what you had here. And he's like, yeah, that's fine. I don't care. Kind of. I mean, in the Donner version, it's more so to get his powers back, he has to sacrifice all the resources he has at the fortress, which is an even bigger blow. To be, and that's the lesson he learns is, okay, we'll let you be Superman again, but you obviously can't do this again. And you now no longer get guidance from your birth parents and recordings and things like that. And you don't learn you got to learn these lessons a different way. They get rid of that in this. They cut a lot of this action too in this version. There's a lot more that happens in the Donner version. A little more brutal, a little bit more like raiding the White House. Not necessary for the movie, but I always thought that was kind of interesting and added a little bit more danger in the Donner cut. Having this whole him figuring out that this guy isn't the president's back there. It's kind of a nice little touch to tension and all that. I do think that the lead up to this whole clash of Superman and these villains takes a little long, and it's not even the Superman losing his powers, getting them back, sleeping with Lois, these guys walking through the country a little bit and taking over. It's a kind of an interesting concept to see, like, while Superman's doing this, just what they've done. But I just feel like it feels like both storylines of Superman and Lois and the Kryptonians coming and invading have to kind of sit there and wait for each other to progress. And it kind of throws off the pacing. I feel like it kind of throws off the pacing for it. It builds a lot of tension, and it definitely makes you excited for them to inevitably meet and fight. But I don't know. I feel like this movie does struggle with that just a little bit with the pacing. So coming up here, they're hitting this diner. The reason we know this is the diner, and I don't know if it's in the theatrical cut or not. Yes, that's Richard Donner walking out of that diner right there to the left. That is Richard Donner, and that's how you know he shot this scene, and that's what made him say, because I guess Richard Lester claimed he shot it, and he came up with the concept. But this diner, I wish I could find a diner like this. I don't know why. I just have always been like, this is like the kind of diner. It has like, it's not a 50, it looks like a 50s diner that like has made it to the 70s. And there's just something about it that I'm like, this place is a vibe. Like, I just feel like the food there is so good. And this guy is such an asshole. The one downside to the Donner cut that they do, and I don't know what their intention was with the original version, is you have this scene, which is so great, and it's also well shot because it's a Donner scene. Has a little bit more of a vibe to it, but he gets his he comes back to kind of get his revenge on this guy, which isn't very Superman, but it's a fun scene. And it's what everybody wants to see from the audience perspective. In the version with Donner, since he uses the ending that he goes back in time to fix everything, he never loses his powers in that way. And that's how he's able to kind of bring back the Kryptonian stuff that he sacrificed, and all that. So nothing happens here. They never were in this. Technically, this is where time travel gets messy, but they were never in this diner, and this dude never bullied Clark. And so, thinking about it, in my mind especially, it's like, this dude did nothing wrong to this guy. He's still a dick, but like, he's sitting at the diner, and Superman comes in and just beats the crap out of him and leaves, and he doesn't know why. He doesn't know why that happened. So that's the one downside to the Donner cut. It's kind of a funny concept. This is obviously a version of Superman 2 where he has never really bled before, and it kind of throws him off. And we are definitely in a different time with that one too, where we are now having a lot of versions of Superman where he's not quite as powerful. So he can bleed. He can get beat up by not just having his powers taken or kryptonite. He has multiple ways. If he gets, hit hard enough, it will hurt. And I think that's been great. They've started doing that. And he was, he started out that way in the comics and in the Fleischer cartoons. He was very he was a lot weaker. Things did affect him. And then in the Superman animated series, they did the same thing where they really lowered down his power level to where he had a little bit more stakes when he fought things. And I think that's probably the way to go. I don't think that's any version of grounding him out of being the character you love. I think that just it's a fun. I think sometimes he can get a little too powerful for certain stories, and it works, and other times he can't. One message that Grant Morrison told in All-Star Superman is he made Superman more powerful than ever. I mean, he was the most powerful version of Superman, and he wanted to prove that you could make him as powerful as you want and still tell good Superman stories. It's not the fact that he's too powerful to make him boring. You just got to put in the effort to tell a good story. But that's another kind of lesson that can go in the other direction too, where it's like, if you have a good story to tell with a Superman who is a little less powerful, but it makes a really great story, then that's all that matters. Superman is as powerful as he needs to be for the story. That's how I believe. And that's how that kind of applies to all the characters, and any character, going into other superheroes like Batman. I mentioned that in a minute here too, but going back to Batman, like he can be as smart as he needs to be for the story. He can be as prepared as he needs to be for the story. If it's a Batman story, he's going to win. This threw me off too. He says, "Damn it." He says, "Damn it." And I'm like, dude, Superman said, "Damn it." Superman cuss. But going back to that broadcast in the White House, I love that moment. It's so corny, but it's so funny where he's like, kneel before Zod. And there's just this silent pause and then just Zod. He just screams Zod. I thought that was kind of funny. Hey, look, Superman's drifting in the snow like Henry Cavill was for the first part of Man of Steel. I don't know anybody who would not pick up a guy walking in something like this, dressed like that. I do not see that happening, but I guess the world's a messed up place. I just cannot see a guy that's like, well, for one, how did a dude get all the way out here by himself and still live? And two, how am I going to sit here and drive away expecting him to survive? Because he's just wearing like a light jacket, like it's fall in New York. So yeah, this is what I'm talking about, and what I've been kind of talking about is this moment where he comes back to the fortress. Everything's dead, obviously, and so they do go that route. But he finds the. I think he still finds the crystal, the green crystal, but it leads to him talking to Jor-El, who says, if you do this, you will lose your contact with me. And that's the sacrifice. I know that like he takes it back in time and it repairs everything again. I don't know, that still kind of gives a cop out, but I liked that. I liked the stakes of that a little bit more, than this, where it's just like this is all dead. And then, because Lois left the green crystal chilling, everything's okay. It's a very Disney kind of solution where the lesson's kind of gone. And I suppose the lesson is still like, don't give up your powers. You're Superman, and you have responsibilities. But the lesson isn't as good as it could be. And this green crystal comes back so much in these Christopher Reeve movies. In Superman 4, when we inevitably do that one, that'll be a fun commentary. Freaked me out as a kid, the fact that he gets scratched by Nuclear Man and becomes an old man, and they put him all this old man makeup and stuff. And that's wild. I remember as a kid, I didn't even know that was Superman for the first few times I watched it because I was so little. My dad's like, that's Superman. He's all old now. And it scared the crap out of me. A character who has completely disappeared from the movie is Lex Luthor, and I think that's another repercussion of them breaking these movies up. Is I think you obviously have to introduce the Kryptonians and have them become the main villains and take over, because Lex has his way in the first movie. But it is kind of weird because, like, in this, it's like you bring Lex back and then he's gone for a while. She has a big slit in the side of her outfit. That's interesting. Up her arms too and stuff. And Lex always wants his land. These I always like that too. I thought that's like the kind of humor you can add that I think is fun. Her crushing his hand like that. But I don't know where they came up with this. Lex is obsessed with land, and I guess it was just one concept for him for the first movie. Kind of a scientific thing for destruction and all that. But it's become such a long-winded running gag for Lex. I mean, in Superman Returns, they brought it back. And that's where I think that's where Superman Returns falls apart a little bit, is just how loyal they tried to be to the Dick Donner movies. But now it's kind of like one of those running jokes, kind of like Lois smoking or her orange juice or something, that was brought in from this. And they they've kept it as a little bit of a character trait. They don't take it too seriously, but you obviously got Lex back with his hair back because he didn't want to do the bald cap. But they said they tried to style his hair to look like he's wearing a wig. I don't know if I fully believe that. I think, but maybe that's something he told them he wanted to try to make it seem like he cared a little bit more. But rest in peace, Gene Hackman, though. Very large body of work. Great actor. I don't know. I'm very much we struggle with casting when it comes to villains and heroes, in the sense that you got to cast a lot of unknowns. I always feel the closer you get to having someone very well known play a character, the harder it is to believe they're that character. So, Gene Hackman was so well known, and he was obviously top billed and things. And I think that was kind of a detriment to him being Lex. And another kind of blasphemous take I have is, I feel the same way with Jack Nicholson as Joker. I just feel like Jack Nicholson was too big of an actor to play Joker. And I know that some people say, well, a good actor can play anything and convince you. Maybe that's the problem. I mean, maybe I wasn't convinced by Jack Nicholson playing the Joker, but now we're in a world where we're getting all kinds of famous actors playing roles, and it works out just fine. But, it's a very delicate thing with these superhero movies and their casting is I cannot imagine if you cast a Superman that is actually very well known. I don't think that'll ever work. I don't think that'll ever lead to anything great. I do think you'll have a lot of actors that are very well known who will act the crap out of the part and do a very good job, but you'll never see them fully as the character because you see them as the actor. And that's what they took on with this movie. And Dick Donner said, you don't want Robert Redford flying around. You don't see, he may act it well, but you don't see Superman. And as much as that's great, sometimes you still got the producers going, you have to have these specific types of people in the movie because that's what makes us money and gets people to come see it. But Ben Affleck was a crazy kind of interesting choice for Batman for that reason, and he did a great job, and he was very convincing. So sometimes they can prove you wrong, but it's, like I said, it's very, very delicate. You have to have a certain type of status as an actor, I think, and you have to have a certain type of acting ability, certain type of style to your acting to make it work or to make it not work. And this is another one of those concepts too that, is it worth Clark protecting his identity as Superman because he doesn't want to hurt the ones he loves? For instance, if he's Superman and everybody knows who he is, they'll go for the people he cares about most, like Jimmy or Lois or whomever. Or does it matter anyway? Because Superman is always around Lois if he's Superman or if he's Clark. Superman will always get Lois in trouble because he's always saving Lois and he's always around Lois and going on dates with Lois, and they're going to go after her anyway because he has just as much of a relation with Lois as Clark would. And so you get to a point where you're like, well, is it even worth it that, she doesn't know to save her? She's getting hurt anyway. She's getting kidnapped anyway. She's in danger all the time anyway. Doesn't matter if she knows he's Superman or not. So, I think that's another reason they ended up kind of changing that too and moving forward with that. That was a little more of a rough flying shot. This is ambitious though. I mean, this one, especially over the first one, and the first one was so ambitious, but this one is very ambitious in its setting. The night of a city, all these action set pieces and props, and then utilizing the powers of all these characters. And oddly enough, this all culminates to this big final fight. Well, not quite final, but the big first fight. And there's no chemistry between Superman and these villains because the whole movie, they were separate. And you don't have Superman give any opinions. You get a little bit, he sees the news, with them in the White House, and he realizes, and like, I'm sure he was told in his, in his teachings from, Jor-El that, who these people are. And you get the backstory of them at the beginning of the first movie and the bits at the beginning of this one. So you get some stuff here and there that kind of develops the relationships of why they hate, the L's and why, all those things. But it just never, I felt like there's just never quite enough to get. Superman doesn't react quite enough to them being Kryptonians, fellow Kryptonians. They still exist. He thought he was the only one. Like, this whole being alone thing, and then finding 3 that are just like him. They didn't ever get to really this woman, but they never really get to develop that and go into it too much. But for the time, this was all like decent action, slow kicks, slow punches, things like that. But like, we didn't get any of that in the first movie. He didn't fight other Kryptonians. I mean, he's got some of these like struggles and things like that, but getting thrown into billboards and trucks and cars, and like I said, all the props, whether it's the flag poles or it's the radio towers or the manhole covers, those are all interesting and fun. But, you had all these pedestrians on the street reacting to this fight, and then you get the whole like 3-minute basically gag of them, just making wind by using their super breath, and the reactions of the people and all the funny gags that come with that, which you can tell Richard Lester did, and he absolutely loved, because he just made the whole intro to Superman 3 be that. And this was always a classic. I remember my dad always going, that drove me nuts, is the woman with that radio tower is falling. She's just going, my baby, and just covering the baby and looking around and covering the baby. And it's like, you could just run, maybe, run out of the way. But, we'll wait for Superman to come fix that for you. the interesting non-noises and reactions. Like, this is all good stuff. Like, this is all they needed to do, right? Just have him, use the heat vision, blow up some cars, get some people hurt, and have some, destruction that way. But, I think that's what Dick Donner intended when he was doing this part, or thinking about doing this part. But then, Richard Lester comes in. He's like, why don't they come down and they use their super breath, and we can have a guy on skates, we're going to have a dude in a phone booth, we're going to have, food flying in people's faces. It's funny because it's like, a lot of people go, Superman 2 is so good. And, especially back in the day, they went, man, I think Superman 2 is better than Superman 1. But if you watch them back to back, you just see the slight cheapness increase with the second one. And obviously, I would watch Superman movies at this level of quality for eternity rather than had them drop to what they were in 3 and 4. But you can just, that doesn't get rid of the fact, but that there was a drop in quality, and it was due to the budgets and the producers and the director change. And I don't know if this was shot on a set. I think it was. I would guess it's a big sound stage. I don't think any of this is really in a city. But this is like such a cop out too. Non drops him in underground, and you just get the shakiness and the fighting. I know they couldn't do it. The effects weren't there, but it's just like, man, if only. It's like when you'd have Kirk Allen try to fly and he'd turn into an animated character. It's just disappointing. You want to see Superman take on this guy who's so much bigger than him physically and still hold his own and actually like not pull his punches a little bit. And instead you just get this. But this is cool. Him punching him that far. That's kind of fun. This here, you can see the whatever they used to stick to him here. You can see like whatever was under it when he hit that windshield. And this just looks kind of just them hanging on to each other. It's obviously not Terrence Stamp. Product placement, stuff like that. But it was like, you didn't see this yet. And this was still, you didn't see an action scene like this in a movie. And not like this, at least with Superman and superheroes. And it was fun. Obviously, I wasn't there to see it when it first came out. But I was, as a kid, I was completely enthralled with this. And coming up here, you have a shot my dad always pointed out when I was a kid, too, that I can't unsee now. When they're lifting this bus and Superman says, don't do it, the people. He's like, I don't know why they didn't do a different take, but Christopher Reeve kind of has a little bit of, he breaks character and laughs. He I don't know. Right there. I don't know if they just didn't have time to reshoot it or what, but he says, no, don't do it. And he has you can tell he breaks a little and he's like laughing for some reason, smiling. Whatever he was seeing on the other side made him break, but they didn't decide to reshoot that for whatever reason. It's very odd. One of my favorite things about watching these movies as a kid was the commentary by my dad, who would, give me all the little tidbits and the things. Did you see that? Oh, that's kind of funny. The manhole cover, you can see where the thing is that connected to him. You can see him, break character. You can see these things. And they've stuck with me ever since. Just, it's another level to be having fun watching these movies, because I just remember the first time I was like, oh yeah, you're right. And these comments are so stupid too. Superman is dead. Let's go get him. Like, we're going to go get our canes and our bats and we're going to beat him. I get the whole thing. It's like in Spider-Man 2, right? It's another inspiration that Spider-Man 2 had, where the city comes back. They know they're not gonna win, but they're standing up for what they believe in. And in Spider-Man on the train with Doc Ock, they all stand in front of him to protect him, and Doc Ock just instantly goes through them all. That's, I think it's a very sweet sentiment, but if you don't lead to that in the correct way, and then especially end it with a gag like this where there's all these people blown away, it kind of defeats the purpose and makes it really silly. And this lasts way too long. And I know Donner didn't direct any of this because he said he would have done the fight scene a little bit differently, and he kind of edits around Lester's stuff to make it fit more into what he was looking for. But he also tries to cut out a lot of the gag parts of it. He does do this part where they blow them away, but like it's a lot of the more normal people just blow away. They don't it's not like this guy staying on the phone, stuff like that. It's a lot of just the normal stuff. And then there's only a couple shots that you see in the Donner cut where you see the dude on skates and stuff, because there's just no way around it. To get certain shots to tell the story with the stuff you didn't shoot is probably very difficult. But like this one, I think he used of them, the burning cars and then blowing, because it's still very serious. And I really don't think Donner shot any of this. Maybe I'm wrong with that. Maybe he did shoot some, and then Lester added the gags in, and maybe like this shot here, this wide shot, that dude on the skates, he kept that in, but not this part and like zooming in on him. I don't know. That's something I never looked up, but I couldn't imagine he did a lot of that. I always thought this was a really good shot, though. Him coming out of the bus and the wind and stuff. The colors, I always thought, they said it about that, about Superman in the animated series as well. They said, when you think of Superman, you think of him during the day, the bright sky, the, just light colors, sun. And they said it was funny when we started animating him, at night randomly when we had to, we realized that like we actually really like how the suit looks at night, and they started doing more episodes with him at night, because they're like, then we could light it differently, where we could have the darker moonlit kind of colors of Superman. And he always just, his backdrop of him in like the night sky was actually really cool. And I always remember them saying that, because even in that shot, like this is a kind of a night scene, and it looks good. I think the going back to the pacing a little bit of this movie, I think the struggle with this one too is just, like I said, so much time of the main kind of threat of the movie kind of being separate, and having kind of two plots, with the Superman losing his powers and being with Lois, and the villains kind of taking over the country. Like I was saying, it kind of leads to them each having to kind of wait for the other to progress, for them to progress, and it just throws the rhythm off of the movie for me a little bit. But the other thing about doing that is you spend so much time doing that, and then culminating it with that battle. And then you have this kind of final moment at the fortress, which isn't, super long. It really, just the way it's paced, it does make the movie feel slightly drawn out and a little not, it's a little too much by the end, where it's like there's a couple false endings, I would say. Nothing huge, not a huge deal, but by the time I remember even when I was a kid getting to this point, I'm like, okay, I'm kind of ready to be done. I'm kind of ready to be out. I want Superman to win, and I want everyone to be happy. And you could obviously trade that. You could cut out some of the stuff beforehand and then do this, and it would probably work a little bit better. But that is one minor kind of criticism I have. And here's that notorious cellophane S that is just so odd. And people nowadays actually kind of like it. They think it's just kind of just weird enough that a lot of people believe that, a lot of the stuff that happens on the at the fortress in this final part isn't real. It's real, but it's just kind of games inside the fortress. So this weird, we're going to use these finger beams to cook Superman. And Superman's going to throw a cellophane S. They can't do any of these things outside the fortress. I think that's a stretch. And a little silly. And they do this whole warp thing too. Where they all like teleport and play this game. That's all I get out of that is the writers and the directors and the producers didn't know the character and what he can do. And Superman always had moments in the comics where he had powers that just appeared out of nowhere, and he used them once and then they never came back. And like the 50s especially, there's all kinds of crazy stories that didn't make sense. But I don't know. I just in this version, especially when you had Donner's verisimilitude kind of mentality. And he says that line that doesn't make a lot of sense to me either, where he's like, he used to play this game in school, was never really good at it. Is he implying that he played this in Kryptonian school? Because they do remember he was a baby when it blew up. He would never have played that. But I think what they're implying is he played it in school, quote unquote school, being Jor-El teaching him for those years. But when he got to the Arctic, created the fortress and became Superman, which is a longer time than people think. Very weird though. Very odd. Like very like, did he just like sit there and warp by himself with his dad watched? I don't know. Clever kind of ending though. I do like the kind of making it full circle. But as you can see here, this shot, Gene Hackman did not agree to come back for any Richard Lester shooting. So anything you see of Gene Hackman is typically unless it's a body double or something, it's Richard Donner. But if you can look at, this is what I was talking about earlier, in some of those scenes in the Fortress earlier, Superman, Chris Reeve looked very bulky and big and muscular. This is earlier in shooting. You can tell he's thinner. He's a little bit, just the way he looks. He hasn't quite filled in the suit yet. So you know that they shot this much earlier, probably at the same time as the first movie. But what I was saying also about this is, I do like this ending. Look how small Chris Reeve looks there, and not to be like critical. I think he still looks good as Superman, but how much smaller he does compared to later in the movie or earlier in the movie. This ending is very well done, I think, and I think bringing it full circle with the whole chamber that makes him lose his powers, and then he uses it to, he reverses it on them, and tricks them. It's a fun because when I was a kid, I truly thought, man, he lost. He's like, I remember what that did to him the last time. And to have that kind of lead to this is a fun, triumphant Superman moment that is a very comic, not only comic accurate, but just a fun comic booky kind of concept. Now, another classic factoid when it comes to this moment coming up here shortly is when Superman, he tells him to kneel, and he does the whole kneel, and where he reveals he still has his powers, he crushes Zod's hand and picks him up. When Chris Reeve picks him up and holds him up, his armpit is very sweaty, which classically they talk about in his audition. They put him in a Superman suit, and he was pitting out because he was so nervous. But that also shows he didn't have a lot of stuff underneath there. It was enough for him to sweat through it. But yeah, he looks so much smaller here. I would imagine this was probably shot around the same time as doing the finale stuff of the first movie, or even earlier. It could have been when they had the fortress set going on, and they they just brought everyone in while it was still built. But coming up here in just a second, you'll see it. So he crushes him, and then he picks him up by his midsection, and right there you see the pit stain. And that's the other thing that people use all the time is Superman kills. He lets these people fall into the great abyss of the Fortress of Solitude and die. So when he snaps Zod's neck in Man of Steel, it's justified and it's all these things. I don't have a problem with that in that movie. However, they, in this version, they do make it, they imply they fall into these catacombs of the fortress and they do not come back. So it's implied they die. But in an extended version for TV, and I think in the Dick Donner version as well, probably maybe just the Dick Donner version. It's been a while since I watched them. There's a little moment where you have polar cops come out of, because he's supposed to be secluded in the Fortress of Solitude, but these cops can find it in the Arctic, and they take the Kryptonian gang and arrest him. I remember seeing that and going, how did they get out there? How did they get out there and not only find this because it was supposed to be secluded, and now everybody knows apparently where it is, but they were able to get cop cars and ambulances out there and take them away. Now, the other thing too is the notorious thing with these Chris Reeve movies is they tend to always have to end the movie on some kind of thing that just stretches your disbelief a little too much. And that was obviously, I think, shot, this terrorist moment was shot probably the same day or same week or whatever it would have been as the original terrorist scene in the first movie, because it definitely was lit by Jeffrey Unsworth still. But you always gotta, they toy with your disbelief and make you go on this adventure that's very fantasy, but also very exciting in many ways. And you can go with it all the way up until the end where you go, oh, then they pushed it a little too far, such as reversing the planet to go back in time, or a magic manipulation kiss that makes her forget he's Superman. Apparently another thing from the comics. And then they bring it back in Superman 4, which is even crazier, because then the idea is, does he just go on these dates with Lois, and then just so she doesn't know who he is, he gets to do whatever he wants and then kisses her, and then it's first date all over again. And I remember they have a hilarious joke in the Robot Chicken DC Comics special where they if Superman has a power to kiss people and they forget who he is, why doesn't he go around to all his villains and kiss them and have them forget who he is? And it's hilarious. If you haven't seen the DC Comics Robot Chicken special, you should watch it. It's on Max, and it's great. It's hilarious. And this is an interesting conversation, and it's an interesting concept of Lois struggling to keep his secret for him and not being able to take it because she has to act like everything's fine. The answer they had to that as we hit the millennium was Lois doesn't care. I mean, Lois is happy because she gets to be with Clark and Superman, and she knows how important he is to be Superman, and she wants to make it work because she loves him. I do think that Margot Kidder's acting is very good in this scene. It's still an interesting conversation and something that is true. I mean, it would be really hard to have to keep that and then act like everything, like you don't, the person you love is, always around you and you can't act like it and things. But that was their answer too, was all you got to do is fall in love with Clark, and at the paper, it's the same thing. You guys are married. So you can still have that affection. It's just with Clark, who you love. And it's not Superman, it's Clark, the real Clark. And so I think that's where you run into also some issues with the version of Superman that is very dorky and very, very not as mild mannered. And I love that version, but like the hard part about that is, then it's Lois falling for this dork, which is charming in many ways, but it runs you into some. That's why she feels the way she does in this movie, is because she feels one way about Clark, the real Clark, and she can't be with that real Clark during work because he has to act like dorky Clark. But they do that in Smallville too. I mean, he's dorky and he's stumbling and falling, and they're very, they play around with that, and there's so many ways you can go with it, and just trying to follow the tradition of the comics in that way. I think people just eventually realize this is just, we're treading water so much that we can't progress these characters just enough to make really great stories. And now that they've opened those floodgates, we have more modern great stories that keep the character alive. But this memory wipe kiss thing, man, I don't know if I can get into that. And how ethical is that from a Superman perspective? I know the idea is he feels bad, but one thing they do have to cut in the Donner cut is this ending of him going back to the White House. And I always thought that was a fun ending of him basically bringing the American flag back. Very patriotic, but very Superman in the same vein. But yeah, this scene is in the Donner cut, and he takes everything back in time as opposed to just wiping Lois's memory. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. Doesn't make a lot of sense because no one would know who he is. He just comes in and just this guy, and he deserves it regardless, but man. But you can also tell yet again, this is a Dick Donner scene. I would guess it was shot with Jeffrey Unsworth. I don't know if this was post the release of Superman 1 or not, but it's very well shot regardless. He pushes this dude by his face. Sorry, I'm just watching this scene because I love this scene. I always like this part. Not much else to say about it. I kind of said it all, but also yet again, well, that's not Superman. Superman is, it's unethical. And yeah, I don't think he would just hurt someone for just to get back at him out of spite. But yet again, I mean, people kind of forget who Superman is over time, and they think that he's this very stoic kind of cardboard character. And that's when people start to not like him. And it's just not true. I mean, whether it's the comic books or whether it's the movies or the TV shows, whatever it may be, it's very similar to Captain America and how they do it in the MCU, where, he has old fashioned values and he wants to be a good person, and he wants, he cares about everyone and whatnot, but he's very ethical, but he's also human, and he has human reactions and human emotions and human feelings about situations and things like that. To be honest, Captain America in the Marvel movies is closer to Superman than Superman had been for a while. Hopefully that'll be corrected with the new one that comes out shortly. But we end this one just like we did with the first, where he is flying and looks at the camera and smiles. And coming soon, Superman 3. Man, I can't imagine how exciting that would have been in the theater, seeing this for the first time and going, oh yeah, I can't wait. If only they knew. I am a firm believer that Superman 3 is worse than Superman 4. And a lot of people, on a technical and critical perspective, I don't think I don't think it is technically as bad. I think it's a better made movie. But I do think Superman 4 is more fun to watch. But that was Superman 2. Not going to lie, it's been a little while since I watched Superman 2, but I've watched it so many times in the past that, I know what it is and everything. But it was fun to go through it. And, I watch nowadays, I jump into Superman 1 so much and watch that one over and over that it was fun to be able to go and see this one. I have a weird relationship with it, obviously, due to the, what we talked about throughout the whole movie, which I didn't intend to do, but I did. Just the two versions and how much better the Dick Donner version is than the original Richard Lester version. But there's also, pros and cons to both, because, Dick Donner did what he could in 2006 to make the version he wanted, but, he didn't finish the movie. And so he had to, obviously he couldn't bring Christopher Reeve in. He couldn't like shoot new things for it. All he could do was use digital manipulation to manipulate some of the stuff that either Richard Lester had shot, or bring in his versions, which was a lot of fun to see his takes of all of these scenes. But in the end, that version doesn't, it's obviously not like a 100% better movie, because he had limitations then too. I would prefer it still, just because I think it just is a better tone to it and everything. But Superman 2 feels like a more cohesive movie, very put together. It has a beginning, middle, and end. I think Dick Donner's version is just that, but better. But just, it's a little too open-ended and a little too spliced for it to feel, you don't walk away feeling like you watched a whole movie necessarily. So yeah, I feel like I'm talking about it a lot. And I know I asked you guys, if you want to have me do a commentary on the Donner cut, I will. I feel like I talked about it a lot and showed a lot of the comparisons. I'm a little worried if we do it, I'm going to just compare it to the Lester version, but I would be more than happy to watch that because it is quite different. And it's not just, an extra additional 30 minutes. It's like, it's a different movie. But yeah, that was Superman 2. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We have Superman 3 next. Not 100% excited for that one. But I'll have a lot to say about that as well. Probably a lot of knee-jerk reactions to that one, because I never grew up watching Superman 3. I grew up watching Superman 4, but Superman 3 was so boring to me, and there's not as much Superman and Richard Pryor and all that. I just didn't like watching it. So we'll have to see. But with that being said, it's been a long podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed the movie, and we will see you guys in the future with more Superman commentary. And we're going to do commentaries on other movies too, so stay tuned for that as well. But until then, I'll see you later.